All right. Hello, and welcome to episode 33 of Webflail, the podcast dedicated to uncovering the greatest failures behind the greatest Webflowers, because success often comes after learning from many failures. I'm your host, Jack Redley, a failure connoisseur, and today my guest is Carter Ogunsola. He is a 22-year-old independent digital designer and developer based in Utah with 3 awards from awards with triple W from awards. He's got 1 CSS design award and a feature on Muesli or Musli, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, to his name. So 5 awards already. He's 22 years old. He's on fire. He's also an adjunct professor in design at Utah Tech, and he's worked with Joseph Berry, Melissa Mendez, many others already. He's very involved with the Flow Party. He's big on community and seems to be doing more and more live streams to help teach others in what he's learned in his career so far. So he's a pro. Super excited to have him here because I keep seeing his name pop up, keep seeing his work, and keep thinking, damn, this guy's going places. Carter, welcome to Webflow.
Thank you very much. I think that was the best intro I've ever heard. But it's something related to me. So thank you very much, Jack. I'm more than excited to be, on your podcast and sort of like, talk about my story, have a chat with you, talk about Webflow, just talk about everything.
Yeah, I am very excited to have you here. And like I said, your work is definitely very different from a lot of the people that are maybe 22 years old starting out, but you
Mhm.
seem to have quite like a mature design aesthetic. I want to dig into that to start with, because if anyone's listening and is like, I actually don't really know who Carter is or what his work is,
Mhm.
go check out his website. It's wild. But how did you learn what you've learned? And tell us a little bit about your background in design.
Okay, so my background in design, I'll kind of like give a backstory. I think that's probably the best way to explain it. Is I was in college, started going to college in 2017, and actually started off as a computer science major. So I was taking all of the crazy coding classes. I was learning Python and all this other stuff. And honestly, I was just having a very like I was having a block all the time. Was this really just doesn't make sense to me? The way it was presented to me, right? The way all of those, topics were being taught to me just didn't make sense. So I spoke to my advisors at the college, and they're like, well, maybe you can try the design and maybe go for graphic design instead. Because I've always wanted to be an architect as a kid. I didn't know. I mean, I'm still sort of as a designer right now, but I always wanted to be an architect. So I changed my major from computer science to graphic design. And then one of my graphic design professors, which is now my colleague as an adjunct professor, funny how that worked out. Um, her name's Rachel Ramsey. Rachel kind of like pulled me aside one day, was like, dude, I see you've got sort of like an eye more than just graphic design. You like actually doing more creative stuff, breaking stuff up, putting stuff together. Maybe veer off to doing digital design and sort of like some interaction or interface design. So then that switched my major to where I was doing graphic design and then a little bit of interaction design where I would take maybe an Arduino chip. I don't know if you know what that is. It's kind of like a microchip and maybe make a sensor that says whenever someone opens a door, send some information to my phone. And you actually add to like design the product, 3D print it, code it as well, and then push it live through some sort of website or whatnot. That way it all worked and connected together. So that was really interesting. And then in my senior project, that was when I actually got introduced into Webflow. This might be me veering off the topic a little bit, but it's like backstory was I then veered off into Webflow and then, down the line and whatnot. But one thing that really, really stood out in the middle of all of this was I was easily able to recognize the difference between good work, bad work, and great work. And I think that was probably, one thing that really benefited me was really being able to recognize, all right, this is good, this is great, this is bad. Now, where do you want to be on that spectrum? Obviously, I didn't want to be bad. Good has been fine, but I think there's a lot of joy that comes with being great. And I'm by no means great yet, but that's definitely one thing I hope to achieve. And it's just really, really like taking a look at all these great people, really understanding their process and learning from them because nothing is really new and they went from someone as well. And I'm just trying to tap in from all that inspiration from all those people that really do great work and, try to use them as a source for my own legacy as well.
Right. So you started off going down the developer path. Then you were like, let's take a look at the design path.
Hmm.
And it sounds like Rachel was seriously influential to recognize that there was, you needed some of both to
Hmm.
actually kind of fulfill your creative potential to some extent. And now you're colleagues with Rachel. That's crazy. So you are an adjunct professor. For anyone that hasn't heard that phrase before, what does that mean?
Being adjunct is instead of you being like a full-fledged, because usually if you're a full-fledged professor, right? A full-fledged professor, you usually would have to do like a 10-year long term or sort of like contract, I guess. But as an adjunct, I'm a part-time and I only teach like a limited amount of credits, which is usually like you can't teach more than 9 to 12 credits as an adjunct, which ends up being like 3 to 4 classes that you teach as an adjunct professor, but pretty much you still own your classes. I've helped rewrite some syllabus as well. And what's funny is, as an adjunct as well, I was part of like I helped in the transition of the college establishing like the design department and then creating a new class which is called Web for Designers, where we teach no code, which is pretty much one of the classes I teach and fully focus on as an adjunct.
That's so cool. So I'm really, really glad to hear that no code is being taught at colleges because
Hmm.
I think there seems to be a little bit of a gap between, well, in my experience, where education is at versus what the potential of what you can do in the real world, and just closing
Hmm.
that gap, right? And we were saying before the call that a lot of the time professors are slightly older, and it's cool that you are 22 and able to connect with people that are
Hmm.
pretty similar in age, but you can also teach them loads because you're kind of in the no code mix. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think like even that was one of like what gave me the opportunity for the college to kind of like after graduation, they reached out to me like, hey dude, da 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 da, you want to teach and whatnot. And I think the reason for that is they, kind of like understood what the space was. And then it goes against to saying like, and this is nothing against older professors, but sometimes they get really stuck into like, well, I've been doing it like this for 10, 15, 20 years, right? But it's like we've got to realize that society keeps moving, like technology changes every 18 to 24 months, new stuff comes out, right? So you've got to keep following that law. But like, sometimes a lot of those professors are usually backdated and whatnot. And with me, since I was already doing design and in sort of like the Webflow community doing client work in the no code, they really saw me as someone that understood kind of like that, that department. And they felt really, really comfortable with hiring me to come teach in that position and whatnot. So that's sort of like how it happened. Was I was already doing some client work already. I already started my agency while I was in college, which we're going to talk about, the failed agency I had. And, that was like really great, in getting me to that position to where I was actually able to start teaching at the same college I graduated from and teaching design there.
Can I just pick up on something you said there? So it's interesting that, there are professors that have been doing the same thing the same way for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, but what I've noticed in the no code space is that sometimes people jump into using the tools because they are so easily accessible, but actually they don't have the fundamentals. And I'm speaking personally, I'm not taking shots at anyone. This is
Hmm.
me as well. Like, there are fundamental things that I am learning that frankly I probably should know as someone that is making websites on the internet. Um, Basics from design, like line spacing, basics in marketing, like
Hmm.
headers, H1s, H2s, basics in code, like what important means when it's written in the code and how that affects, etc. So there's it's interesting that you are teaching a class about web design and kind of no code tools in the space. But
Hmm.
can you give us a little flavor of kind of how the fundamentals collide with the new very, very accessible tech, which may not actually be fully understood by people that are just starting out?
So I'll just use my class syllabus that I teach to sort of like explain this because I think this describes exactly what you're talking about. Is obviously the goal, the class is web for designers, and the goal is actually to make designers less scared of making stuff on the web. because what we noticed, throughout my time as a student, and what some of the professors that were really interested in students noticed, was that design students were very, very scared of code. And it's like, well, there's already all this no code platforms like Webflow, Shopify, Softly, the list goes on, Framer and whatnot. How can we integrate that into, like, the school system? That way designers are actually not scared of code. But first off, the most important thing, like you said, is understanding the fundamentals. So even before, like, I take my students, or before the syllabus take the students through even getting into Shopify or using no code tools, we make sure that they understand the fundamentals of HTML, CSS, and what the proper HTML structure looks like, what are headers and whatnot. Because yeah, it's super fun to just dive straight into a tool like Webflow in this case, and start pushing stuff around, dragging in a div block, dragging in a nav, dragging in this, dragging in that, dragging. But it's like, if you really don't know what you're doing, then you just honestly see that you end up with a beautiful mess. It might look great. You might think it's functional, but it really, in the back end, it's more or less just a beautiful mess. But if you understand, like, the key fundamentals behind HTML structures and CSS, then you're way better off. Because if we really think about it, Webflow is literally a visual code builder, right? Instead of me grabbing my computer and starting a project from scratch on Microsoft Visual Studio or any other text editor, Webflow helps me get all of those, boilerplate stuff done, and then 100 times the speed. Right. So if you really understand the fundamentals, then it's really going to play in your advantage, most especially once you even want to start doing more custom stuff. Like, for example, using external JavaScript libraries, understanding what attributes mean and how to use attributes, or, doing some GSAP, or even if it's even in the case of using something like Webflow, Xano, and Wiz, which I've been having some fun around playing with those platforms as well. And there might be some projects that's going to come out. Not going to say too much about that on that.
Whoa. Okay.
But if you really understand those core fundamentals, then it really just helps you in the long term, because like you said, you see something that has exclamation important, and you're not wondering, well, why does that have that? You see something that's called an attribute, and you're wondering, well, what is an attribute? How does this affect this? There's something as well like IDs. Sometimes we don't really give our sections like the correct IDs. That way, maybe if someone that can't see your website is using a script to kind of like read through the website, and there's like a voice command giving back the person feedback, that reads through the different structures of the website, and that plays into SEO as well. But it's like, if you understand all these fundamentals, making sure that even if you use a div as a nav, you actually make sure that on the back end it recognizes that as a navigation. It recognizes a section as a header, recognizes a section as a footer, as a CTA. It's just like those really tiny bits that, if you already understand in the fundamental, then it actually plays a big role in your website being beautiful and not being a mess, right? Being beautiful and having good structure, good UX, and all that sorts.
Definitely. Yeah. I feel like I've come at it the wrong way around, though. I'll describe it as gilding turds. I was trying to make something look really cool, but actually it was a complete mess under the hood type thing. Slash, it didn't even look nice on like mobile landscape, or like, there was like breakpoints where it just didn't look good. But on my little laptop screen, it looked great. And then I put it out there to the world and it was just terrible. So, for anyone that's maybe in that position as well, you say learn the fundamentals. What key fundamentals do you think people really need to know about, and where can they get some help with those?
Honestly, I think W3 schools is probably all you would ever need, to be honest. Like, just to understand the basics of HTML and CSS. And I would know, I wouldn't specifically say anything is more important than any, because I feel like any HTML structure that you have, or any HTML attributes or any CSS stuff as well, I feel like they're all equally important, because at some point you're going to need them all. And literally just going through like W3 schools, for example, and just going through each one section on HTML syntaxes, CMS syntaxes, and whatnot, and just really understanding them. Like, honestly, this could take you like a week or two just to completely go through all of them, even if you already know what you're doing. And sometimes if you already know what you're doing, sometimes you go through W3 schools, read through them. And I do these because I teach, and I'm like, no way, I forgot about that. No way I could actually do that. Right. So I think like just I don't think there's anything specific on like HTML and CSS that I think is very, very important, but it's like just understanding everything in general. And most especially for HTML, I just think structure is what matters. Understanding you've got parent elements, child elements, grandchild elements, and all of this sort of like function together, and understanding like what a span means, what a div means, what you know, it's just it's I still think HTML is fairly simple. So there's nothing too crazy that I think is not easily understandable, or maybe I'm wrong.
Awesome. And coming on from that as well, I think the how not just how to build a website and what are the fundamentals of the code that's under the hood of what you're building, but also how that website is going to perform as well. Because I think, especially at the start of when I was using Webflow, I was like, okay, I want some crazy preloader or whatever.
Mhm.
But actually, there's things that affect page load speed. There's header tags. There's on-page SEO, and I think there's a lot of stuff that Webflow does a really, really good job to make it like really accessible to build and stuff. But there's a lot of people that don't really know about like Google Lighthouse scores and things like that. So putting this to you, because I'm really intrigued by your websites. There's obviously like beautiful websites with tons of animations, tons of stuff going on. But do you think there needs to be a line drawn between, making something that's insanely visually impressive, but also highly functional? And kind of how do you think about that? Because I think a lot of different Webflowers maybe prioritize one more than the other, and kind of client work they might treat very differently to their own portfolio work. How do you think about that?
So I'm actually just gonna reference. I think his name is Bruno Rizio. I think hopefully I pronounced that right. And in the last award conference, I can't remember the name of the conference, but he talked about this as well. Is obviously UX, functionality, page speed, all of that stuff is great. But then, understanding like aesthetic as well is great. So I think like people have to probably like separate those and like understand them separately, and then figure out what's the thin line in between bringing those two together. Because if we think about page loads, for example, and the page load speed, like you've got to consider like what amount of stuff is being hosted on the current website, and what your image sizes are, and how much animations you're pulling in, or how much custom scripts you're pulling in, which is going to affect the page speed. Like, and this is something like I usually access is like I do something that I just started doing this recently is I usually do like a hierarchy list of, is this animation important, right? Do a list, dot, dot, dot. This is important. This is important. If I do this with Webflow IX2, it's going to be lightweight. It's not going to take too much. If I do this with GSOP, which is maybe just not as important, I'm going to have to call in this custom JavaScript. Does this add more aesthetic? Does this make it better? And I sort of like do like a pros and cons list. And then I sort of like decide what direction I want to take it, because then that's going to play into what the accessibility looks like, what the page speed looks like, and all that stuff. But at the same time, it's a hard balance, and I'm not by no means saying I'm great at this as well. I still think this is something I'm really trying to learn and understand, is where is the balance in between functionality and UX and aesthetic, and having like good page speed, good loading times. I think that's something that I'm continually like learning about. That way you're at that sweet spot, see where you've got an amazing website, aesthetically looks great, it's got great UX and great page speed at the same time as well. So I think I'm constantly learning about that, but it just takes like really balancing out through a pros and cons list. Is this website still going to be amazing without this crazy library or animation, or is there a simpler way I can simplify this, that way it's more lightweight than having just ginormous kilobytes of stuff being loaded at the same time?
Yeah, I really like the way that you're saying it's not necessarily like you have to choose one or the other. Like it's not like a website that has no animation or a website that has tons of animation, which affects loads of people. What you're saying is there are some particular animations that you need to judge the importance of because they are heavy, and you can have both a beautiful website, but one that does have a lot of animations. It's just you need to consider the heavyweight ones that are really going to slow down the site or affect
Right.
accessibility, etc. Yeah. Okay, good advice. Love that. Okay, so I feel like we've got a real good sense of who you are and what your values are and stuff. But that's all nice, but we're not here for nice. We want to get into the failures now.
Let's
So
get in the gritty stuff. Let's
let's
do
get
it.
in the grit, exactly. Let's get that grit in the oyster. Okay, so tell me about failure number one, starting an agency while in
Mhm.
college without understanding what it meant and its implications.
Whew. I think this is really one that I think is always going to be a highlight in my life, in my career, because it was a defining moment, right? It was I was already in college, and while in college, I started using Webflow through my one of my senior project, and my Webflow work was really great because we usually have an exhibition. Right. So for senior project, we usually have an exhibition where they invite local businesses, local startups to sort of like see what the students worked on. And a lot of companies and people saw my work, and then I started making connections, taking business cards, calling people, and I started getting projects on the side. So I'm like, well, since I'm already getting project on the side, I might as well just set up an LLC, and then from setting up an LLC, I might as well get an office. And then there was a classmate of mine that I felt like at that point we had an alignment, but I was probably it was still great at the start, but I was probably short sighted and not thinking long term, right? So we just said, all right, we're going to come together and actually run this as an agency. So we got an office. We had to pay insurance. We had to pay rent. We had to do all of this. So we just jumped straight into the fire without really understanding what it means to be an agency, right? We thought we were getting projects, we were doing client work, but at the same time, we were losing tons and tons of money based off overhead cost, based off not understanding how to budget right, based off not charging right as well, and based off even just doing literally everything and anything people asked of us, right? So it just wasn't really going great, and it was. I don't want to say it was a bad experience. I feel like it was a good learning experience, but I don't think I really understood what running a business meant, like taxes, having an accountant. Like there's like so many parts and pieces, insurance, and do I put people on W-9? Do I put people on W-10? All that stuff that I just had zero clue about. And money was just coming in and flying out, coming in, flying out, project getting done. Some people actually got burnt as well, right? But I'm glad I been able to reestablish a good relationships with some clients that actually got burned in that process as well. And they got burned as a reason of me not really knowing what I was doing and trying to, I mean, it's, people say fake it till you make it, which is great, but at least you've got to understand some fundamentals of what you're doing if you're going to fake it till you make it. And that was sort of like my experience. And we had to close shop on that at some point, because through some people getting burned, we really not know what we're doing, not managing and handling client communication properly. We started losing client, we started losing more money, and we are losing all that money and all the overhead costs we had. We couldn't afford it. So the only next plan was to close down, and then that honestly made the relationship with my partner even more stale, because now money became an issue. Is, well, I'm sitting there like, well, I've got to use the rest of the money in the bank account to pay the rent and pay off the insurance, but it's like, well, you've got to get paycheck out like we agreed on every 15th and 30th. So it's like all of this was just it just went crazy. And yeah, I don't want to say that word, but it just went crazy, and we just had to close shop and just decide to close it down in pathways. But I still kept the LLC, which is I sort of use now as an independent designer. And then yeah, that was, I think that's my whole spill on how that experience went. And I still think, even if it was not the best, I think it's a very, very defining moment in my life, because now I've taken lessons that I've learned from that, and I implement it now in my day-to-day life and engagements that I get.
Wow. Okay, I think we need to breathe after that, don't we?
We
That
need
was
to. I think I was really
great.
passionate about talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, you went in. Okay, so can I just ask, if you were to go back in time um, to when you were first starting this LLC,
Mhm.
what would you tell Carter, who was about to start an LLC at that point, if you were to give him some advice now?
I would tell Carter, first off, starting an LLC is great for tax reasons, great for protecting you, but I think I should have still just kept on just being sort of like a freelancer instead of just jumping in into starting a company. Honestly, I could have still started a company and worked from my home and not have to have all the overhead costs. I could have started a company and 1099 everybody when I needed to. I could have done all of that stuff, but I just jumped straight into like, I think I liked and enjoyed the idea of having a company, right? Yeah, that literally went over my head. Like I was so excited about that, and it's funny. Like I'll wake up and go to the office in a nice shirt, nice pant, and I just like that vibe. Like, or I'm going to my own office. I'm not working for someone else. But it's like I fully didn't understand that there were steps. Rome wasn't built in the day, right? You just don't get up there and put up a construction of a house and the house is built. The house is going to crumble, right? There's got to be a foundation that you lay, and I don't think I had a very solid foundation of understanding the basics of my expertise as a designer at first, right? I don't think I had a full understanding at that point. Then I didn't have a full understanding of what running a business was. So my foundation was was not a foundation. It was a very soft foundation that was gonna break in literally any like it was just a bad foundation that I set up. So I think just having a core foundation is key. Like, yes, that might take a while to build, right? You've got to buy the land, you've got to set up the plan, you've got to do all of this stuff, and you've got to set the foundation right. That takes a while. But it's like once you get to that point, everything just kind of like falls in easily because then whatever you're building, you're building on something strong. And I was absolutely building on a non-existent foundation, to be honest. And I think that was what mattered the most was I needed to understand my onions and understand the ins and out of what it is I was getting myself into. And if I was to go back and give myself advice, it's going to be you've got to pay your dues first before you get to that point. And I didn't pay my dues yet.
Okay. So it sounds like the advice is make sure that you're doing the fundamentals well and you know what your process is as a freelancer first, so that maybe you've got a really, really clear roadmap of, how to get clients, how to handle clients, and how to basically, know your system well enough so that you can write that all down and processize that, systematize that, so that if you were to hire someone, if you did want to go down that route, you could have done. And also the other big one is you don't need a physical office to have a company, right? That sounds like a huge learning. And this reminds me, there's a guy called Yaya on Twitter. You might have seen him around. And we did an episode where he said a very, very similar thing. Do you think that there's this idea of what a company is, where you wear a suit and you go to an office and you're your own boss, but actually it's just complete fallacy? Or kind of how would you look at it now?
I think it really depends on what you're doing or what your niche of what you're doing is, because obviously if you're a lawyer or you're a legal practitioner or something of that sort, right, then that kind of like fits into that category of having an office and wearing a suit and having a meeting room where clients can come in and you've got all of that. But I think as creatives we really don't need that much to actually get stuff going, because literally all I need right here is this, and I'm set off and I'm good to go, right? So I think like, the ideology of you got to set up an office, you got to do all of that stuff, mostly as a creative, really is not needed. But I think if you're creative that's scaling, that's starting an agency or a studio proper, and you maybe want to have maybe more collaborative sessions, then yes, it is nice to sort of maybe have a space and sort of like, have a designated office and all that sort of stuff. That way, you know, there's more collaboration and you got a process in place. But I don't think like I think it varies from sector to sector, right? It depends on what you're doing and at what skill you're doing it, right? You could be a lawyer as well that maybe only works with a few clients or maybe one or two clients, right? And you could work from your home and be fine, right? I just think an office is wherever you can get work done. But if you're scaling and you've got multiple clients, you've got multiple people you got to manage, then I think having a designated space then makes sense.
Yeah, and I know quite a lot of people that have kind of a remote team, or they might have an agency that is remote, but they will meet at a WeWork or some kind of co-working space
Mhm.
if they were to have meetings with the team and also meetings with clients. They'll go into like a WeWork, they'll rent an office space for a day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So they obviously don't have those overhead costs. Can I just dig into your initial motivation to set up an agency and then now being a freelancer? Because I think there's a lot of conversations about, I want to set up an agency. I want to grow $1 million agency. In fact, I had a conversation the other day about someone was like, I want to grow $1 million agency. $1 million is just an arbitrary number. Like, it's why a million? Like, what is that? Is once you hit a million, are you going to be happy? Like, what are you trying to achieve? I'm kind of rambling here, but what is your experience having tried to grow an agency versus now being a solo freelancer, and what your metric for success now is?
I think more the bigger difference was it's been easier for me to build off my personal brand, and with me being like sort of like an independent freelancer designer, compared to like wanting to run an agency. And there's this sort of feeling people have when they hear agency. Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe bad. Depends on the client you're working with, right? And almost like with my style of client and style of projects that I work, I don't think people really enjoyed like that agency term, because it then felt like, well, there's all this bureaucracy in politics and all this overhead costs and all this other stuff that then plays into how I get treated. And people feel like clients might sometimes feel like there may be sometimes a number. Whereas if you're running an agency as well, you might feel like you've got benefit over a freelancer because they feel like you've got all the expertise and the people you can pull in. But for me, it just wasn't working. It just wasn't clicking at that point. And like me being the personal brand has kind of like helped. And I think this was one of the conversations I had on a live Twitter space session with Chris Stowe. A lot of you guys in the creative space might know Chris Stowe, where I was kind of like, asking him a question about kind of like what I'm doing. And I think that the advice he gave that day definitely helped with me getting clarification on, well, if you're doing all of this stuff, trying to run a business, trying to run an agency, it's not working out and whatnot. But as a freelance creative, you're doing fine yourself, less overhead cost. You get to work with even other agencies as well, which is one of the things you kind of like mentioned and whatnot. Instead of competing with them, you're then partnering up with other agencies, bigger agencies and whatnot. And I think that was kind of like the eye opener to me, was like, all right, maybe I might just pivot a bit and do this other thing instead, and just be
Yeah,
a freelancer instead of an agency.
that makes a lot of sense, because I think, one, sometimes clients want to work with a solo freelancer because they know that they're not going to get messed around. Like, there's one person kind of who they're dealing with, and who actually
Mm-hmm.
does the work, but also does the communication, and they're not just another number, because a solo freelancer won't have so many clients necessarily. But then also that other thing you said, that the fact that you're a solo freelancer doesn't mean that you can't do bigger projects. You may partner with other designers,
Mm-hmm.
like Joseph Berry, for example, who I know you've worked with, or you might partner with an agency and, maybe do the design or whatever for agency work. So I think that's something that's really worth saying. Like, just because you are a freelancer doesn't mean, you're just sitting in your room
Mm-hmm.
on your laptop, just working on your own stuff the whole time necessarily. You might actually be part of a bigger team, even if you are a freelancer sometimes.
Right. And I think a lot of the great guys, to mention like people that inspired me, like Bruno Orizio, Nicola Miranda, Joseph Berry, all of those guys are, freelancers or started off as freelancers doing their own thing. And then they sort of like almost run a collaborative studio type of thing, to where if you've got to collaborate with a 3D artist, you've got to collaborate with a motion graphic designer, right? You've got to collaborate with an illustrator on the project. You bring all of those talents in and make an amazing project, right? I think there's a lot more benefit, and I'm seeing even a lot more trend in people really doing that rather than running a full-fledged agency, which I think is really gonna kill the agency market to an extent, right? I think that's definitely gonna take a good chunk of some market share from like the typical agency, if there's a collective group of people or freelancers that like maybe working together or whatnot. And I think they call that studios, I guess, right? And they sort of like form a studio to where they all come together, but individually they still run their independent practice. I think that space is looking amazing, and that's sort of like maybe where I'm headed down the road, is sort of like establishing sort of like a collaborative studio experience, to where if I've got a very big project, I bring in a designer, I bring in a illustrator, bring in a 3D artist, motion graphic designer, a brand specialist, right? Put all of these people together and make something amazing, right? I think
Mm,
there's a lot of that's kind of like where I'm heading at the moment. I think.
interesting. Well, you heard it here first, people. Agencies are dying. Love that. The collective is growing.
I think the
Awesome.
collective is growing for sure.
Okay. I am very, very intrigued to see how that plays out. But regardless of whether that plays out across the industry or just for you,
Mhm.
it sounds like a really, really exciting step for you as a creator who's built a personal brand, who's done a lot of work, solo, and is now being recognized as someone to collaborate with and bring in for particular projects with other designers in the space. I think that's a
Mhm.
really, really awesome kind of next step for you. So good luck with that. Tell me about failure number 2 then. Closing shop on the agency because things didn't work out with your previous partner and immediately jumped into another relationship to start another agency which crumbled before it started. Carter, what the hell?
I don't know if it's me or I just found people that just wanted to get burned by me, or I don't know what it was, but it was, that sort of like happened. And I met with this other dude that as he's a seasoned marketer. Like he's been doing this for about 15, 20 years. And he sort of like approached me saying, well, I know you already closed shop with this, but me myself, I'm sort of like doing this solo. And I think if we maybe join heads together, then we could maybe be more of a powerhouse to where, since I'm really focused on like core marketing stuff and making ads and doing marketing campaigns and doing, getting people to record a video and do photo shoots, that's sort of like what he did. Whereas I was sort of like the designer that could do branding and do some website and do some fun stuff. It's like, well, let's come together and be a powerhouse. Just like in a regular relationship, you've got to date someone, right? You've got to take them out on a date, take them to a nice dinner, go out for a few dates. You just don't agree to be like, all right, it's going to be boyfriend, girlfriend, proper today, or I'm putting the ring on the same day I meet you, right? That was almost what I did. Was I'm like, oh, okay, this other guy is not working out. This other guy is right here, promising me all these things, and it's all going to work out great. And I'm like, sweet, let's get it. We did set up an LLC. We did set up a business bank account and whatnot. But what's funny is we closed all of that down even before we made any like money or even worked with any client, because we sort of then realized, like, in between the process of setting up all of this stuff, we were just bumping heads and the relationship wasn't working like we wanted it to work, right? So we just both, like, agreed that, I think it's going to be best people individually do our stuff, because yeah, it does seem great that we can work together and whatnot. But in reality, we think there's going to be a lot of problems, right? So I think maybe this is me, maybe even learning from the previous experience a little bit and saying, well, there's already some red flags, there's already some signs, and I don't think this is really going to be beneficial. But we had jumped all of those and already set up an LLC, set up all this stuff for fun to set up. But I think you need to be like a little bit further down the road before you go ahead and try to set up all of that stuff. That way, you're not maybe wasting money, wasting resources, wasting time doing all of that. So that was literally the experience. Was we jumped ship, went straight into the marriage, and then it's like getting divorced the same day you marry, saying, what? You said something about that and I don't like your take on that, so I'm going to get a divorce. And that was literally how it happened.
You talked about red flags there. So for someone that maybe is in conversation with another freelancer and they're like, let's set up an agency, and they have this strange gut feeling that something's not right, but maybe they can't identify what that's coming from. What red
Mhm.
flags did you learn from getting burnt the first time that you maybe identified as you were setting up this second agency?
Hmm. I think communication was one for sure. And I would maybe say this was maybe on both sides, but maybe on my side was maybe I was a poor communicator of expectations, and I really didn't fully understand the expectations of the other person, because what then happened was a lot of the work and all of the setting up ended up just all on me. So I felt like the other person was not really doing anything while I was doing all the work. So I think I really didn't communicate the expectations that I wanted. And this was one of the things that I think you should watch out for, is making sure that you guys are able to communicate in a very easy manner and everyone's on the same page at all times. Skill gap as well is included as well. Is you've got to make sure that you understand the skills, expertise of this person you might want to be possibly working with. Because I got into a relationship thinking, well, this person can do this and do that, and then in the middle of it, I come out and find out, even if they've been doing this for years, they've only been outsourcing it to all these other people and they really couldn't do it. So when it came down to really doing it, we started having issues as well. So it was like, understand the skill gap, watch out for all this stuff, and make sure like they really, really know what they're talking about. And then money as well is a very, very big issue. Is who spends what, who gets what, who owns what percentage, who owns what, all of this stuff has to be like really, really talked about. And this is not an agency or any company you're setting up, right? Who spends what, who's bringing in what money at the setup, because obviously you can't use $0 to set up an agency or a company, right? There's going to be some upfront costs, right? And it's like, well, who's bringing in what? And because this person is bringing in what, does this person own a certain percentage, or does this person get reimbursed once you get some profit? And at what point did they get reimbursed? And, I think these are all conversations that you just really got to be very, very open about. And it's got to be someone that you really trust and you feel like you can have a good relationship with, that's not going to get burned. Because it's very easy for partnerships to get burned, most especially if you're deciding to partner up with someone to start something. Like partnerships, like look it up, the amount of partnerships, like just in general, like having partnerships in business is very, very hard. So it's something like you would be very careful about. And it's good if you have green flags, but what you should be looking for if you're going to get into a partnership is red flags. Don't look for the green flags, look for the red flags. And I think you'll find your answer in the red flags. See if it's something you could deal with or something you can change.
This feels like I'm talking to a relationship coach. A lot of the stuff a lot of the stuff you're saying sounds very, very similar to having a partner, as in a romantic partner, right? And there's a reason for that, because you're doing something that's really, really hard to do over a long period of time, and you need to have open communication, receive feedback, and give constructive criticism. And then there's also the money talk, which is a big one that some people want to talk about, some people don't want to know about, but ultimately you both care about. And it's kind of like, it's a tough one. So something that I think might be helpful to bring up right now is the book Crucial Conversations. Have you ever read that book?
I actually haven't read that book. I've been so bad in reading books this year. I used to be a better reader, and maybe I got to get back into it. But I'll definitely take that down and look it up.
This is the book that I really, really recommend. It's quite a popular book that really, really helped me communicate, not just with friends, family, but clients. And then Never Split the Difference is another really, really good book. If you're not so much a reader, Audible, all of that jazz, great. Really, really recommend it for making to basically change confrontation into constructive conversation.
Right. I think one that I've read that's definitely helped me a lot, and I bet a lot of people have probably read this as well, is, I can't pronounce his name, is it Dane Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People? Or Darn Carnegie, I don't know how to pronounce that name.
Dale Carnegie. Yeah.
Carnegie. Yeah, that's how you say it. Yeah, Dale Carnegie. But yeah, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think that's definitely a great read, because the way he breaks it down is in very, very simple terms. Sometimes when you're reading that book, it might sound very cheesy, all this stuff he's saying, but it's like you've got to recognize that there's some like body language stuff that he's talking about and things that they're very tiny that people would pick on just to like decide if they like you or not.
Awesome advice there. So we got some practical tips there. Crucial Conversations, can't remember the author. Never Split the Difference, can't remember the author. And then Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. They all kind of sound really cheesy titles, but the content
Hmm.
is really, really helpful for managing relationships, which is ultimately, kind of depending on the quality of your relationships, depends on the quality of your life to a certain extent, if you believe that. I do. But yeah, really, really
Absolutely.
helpful. Really, really helpful to yeah, I think in the Webflow space we talk a lot about div blocks and rems and pixels and stuff, but actually client work depends on your communication skills a lot of the time, and it's not talked about enough. Business relationships kind of comes down to very basic human psychology and being open, etc.
I
So
think that's
yeah,
usually where most problems come with is if from the start you're able to clearly communicate your pain points, even to your clients, right? Communicate your expectations and have all of this stuff just being brought up front. The money conversation that surprisingly no one really likes talking about. And I've been really training myself to get comfortable with that. If all of that stuff is really being brought up front, then obviously the client then understands what the expectations are, what the sort of engagement is. And then, whenever you run into problems because you've been clear and been upfront about it, it's not like I never told you, or oh, surprise, there's this new thing, right? It's just communication and obviously understanding human psychology and understanding, like, even if you're a designer, there are clients, sometimes designers feel like we've got to go rage at the client, like, oh no, they make the logo bigger, right? You've got to understand and be like, all right, yeah, sure, I'll make the logo bigger, but you have the complications, and here's what you're going to get from this. If you do this wrong, this is what's going to happen. But note that I'm not going to be to blame in that situation if that happens because I'm advising against this. Yes, I'll be more than happy to take this change or whatever it is you're recommending. But yes, we can take this direction. But with this direction, this is going to be the possible results. With this other direction I'm recommending, this is going to be the possible results. Now you pick in between apple or orange. Which one do you want? Right? Sort of conversation.
how do you like them apples? Okay, tell me about failure number 3. Not quickly understanding how to balance an unhealthy work-life relationship and putting relationships in jeopardy as a result.
I think this came with me switching to being an independent, freelancer, designer, whichever term we want to use in here was, I started picking up traction, getting a lot much work, a lot much client work, and things actually started moving the direction I wanted them to go. So it's like, well, this is all I've been praying for. Now it's finally here. I'm gonna make sure I pay my dues and spend every minute, every hour, every second working and doing the work I've been asking for. So that was sort of like my mindset. And I kind of like went down this deep rabbit hole, once, more work started coming for me, that all I cared about was work. I stopped working out as much. I stopped spending time with my girlfriend as much. I stopped calling my mom as much. More family time, less family time, less time with my homies, going out to the bar, having a beer. Like I stopped really doing all of this because I was so much in the hustle culture mindset, saying I'm just gonna grind, 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 and grind, right? And this was good for a short amount of period, right? Work was getting done, all of this stuff was getting done. But then I slowly realizing that, well, I was already putting, relationships in jeopardy, saying I was not having a good as, you know, I wasn't calling my mom as much. She didn't really know about what was going on with me. My girlfriend, started telling me, well, Carter, you're not spending as much time. We're not doing as much stuff together. And this is affecting our relationship. My friends were like, dude, we never see you at all. Like, you're always indoors. So, like, there's all these different comments, coming from all these people. And then I slowly realized, well, there's going to be sort of a balance in between, working, being a grinder, being motivated, wanting to get stuff done, and then really balancing relationship. And I think if you maybe work from home as a freelancer as well, it's very, very easy for work to feed it into your personal time that you spend outside of work. That happens to me 100% of the time. And I think that was like one thing that really, really hurt a lot of relationships I had was not, paying attention to them. And the only thing I cared about was work, right? Only thing I ever cared about was work, and it did hurt a lot of relationships. And at that point, when I realized it was some sort of like eye opener to me, and then I started consulting with some mentors that I had, people up there in entrepreneurial space, asking questions like, well, how do you balance, being in a relationship and having to work, how do you balance this and that, and I started, seeking for help. And I've finally got help and sort of like figured it out that yes, you can do all of this stuff and still work as hard, but at the same time you've got to set boundaries, because there's more to life than just work. There's more to life than pushing pixels and making a website. Like it's fun and exciting to be working on a project, doing something new, but at the same time you've got to make sure you've got a healthy life balance, because that's going to make you happy in it's going to give you like happiness long term, compared to just going down that rabbit hole and all you care about is work. Is you got to find that right balance in between work, eating healthy, having a good workout, going on a date with your significant other, spending time with family and friends. I think you can really find that right balance, because genuinely the only reason you're probably working is ultimately to have financial freedom, and those are the people you've eventually want to spend your financial freedom with, or you want to express your financial freedom in some way too, right? So it's like you don't want to burn all those relationships just because you're trying to like chase that money. So I think that's probably one of the biggest stuff for me and mistakes that I've learned from, is having that sweet balance and finding that sweet spot in between work and life, most especially if you're a freelancer and you work from the house. It's hard.
And so, what boundaries have you set for yourself now that you didn't have before?
So what boundaries I've set was, I'm very unorganized. And this was kind of like my girlfriend being the therapist in this case and saying, all right, you're unorganized, Carter. So we're going to say, what's your schedule looking like for all the weeks? What days do you absolutely need to have meetings? What days do you absolutely have to be at the house, which is the days I have to teach? And then I kind of like set up my schedule for that. So days I teach, Monday, Wednesdays, I'm most likely not going to do a lot of client work. And everyone I'm working with, clients, partners, agencies, everyone's all aware that Monday, Wednesdays, I'm all gone. So Monday, Wednesdays are more time where I can go ahead and teach. And then Monday, Wednesdays, I can use those days to spend more time with family, friends, and whatnot. And then even the days that I do work all day from the house, Tuesday, Thursday, Fridays, maybe Saturdays, right? I try to wake up as early as 8 a.m., 9 a.m. to start work done. And then right around 5 or 6, I shut it all off. Computers off, laptops off, phone is on DND, and just like put it all away no matter what. And I get back to it the next day, just because I work in the house and it's very hard to like disconnect, because my room is literally in the on the other side of the wall, right? So it's very, very hard. So it's just setting that boundary, saying no matter what, once it's those days that I usually work, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, once it's 6 or it hits that period, I just put whatever it is away, go spend time with my friends, play some Call of Duty, go on a date with my girlfriend, call my mom, and I don't have to worry about work past, that hour anymore. I think that's helped me significantly in building those relationships back, and sort of like having more of a balance, and still having time to go to the gym and whatnot. Because previously I would literally wake up at 9 and work till 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. and then get in bed, and then my partner looks at me like, where have you been? You've been gone all day, dude. I'm about to go to bed. I got to be up at 5 in the morning, so I don't get to spend time with you. So it's just having that time where I just switch it all off and put it all away. I think it's very important to have that.
It sounds really healthy. I had a similar conversation that was really formative, where my friend said to me, because I was going to meet him in a bar, and he was like, cool, let's meet here. And I was like, oh, sorry, I actually need to keep working. And he's just like, is your client still working now, Jack? And it really helped me kind of switch my head, because I was like, wait, the boss of the company they're not working now. Like, and they're not going to get back to me. I need to send this boss stuff and whatever. And he was just like, just come and have a beer, you idiot. And it really, really helped me. And sometimes it's really hard to see that as a freelancer. I know that sounds so obvious, but I think sometimes as a freelancer, you don't actually see how kind of blinkered you are, because you're just like, I've just got to get this done. But it's like, it can wait. You can do it tomorrow morning. Like, it's not, you
Right.
don't need to just get it done necessarily. And people are far more forgiving than you think. Because I think as a freelancer, you're like, the customer's always right kind of thing. You're just like, I'm just going to I want to get this done. I want to impress whatever. And actually, if you send a message saying, hey, I know I said I'd get this done by today, but it's actually taken longer than I thought, and I'm going to send you a message at before midday tomorrow, whatever it is. If you give
Mm-hmm.
some kind of specific reason for not getting it done, times I will get it done, I will get this to you by X or whatever, the client's normally like, yeah, sure. And you're like, oh my God, I can go and have a beer. And it's really not as big a deal as you think it is in your head sometimes.
Right. I think that's what I realized is as far as you're very responsible in communicating that, then most times people are not just pricks, right? People just don't decide to be mean and be like, oh, it's a day late and I'm gonna say this thing about you and call you bad names and whatnot, right? I think like we're humans. There's a lot of decent humans out here, and people are very understanding that you don't have to kill yourself and work extra 5, 6 hours the previous night when you could just wake up the next day, fresh mindset, and still get it done, right? So I think that's something freelancers we got to like snap out of and just realize like sometimes just cool off and get it done the next day. And obviously, if you plan right as well and schedule your times and projects properly, I don't think you have too many problems dealing with that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that comes to mind as you said that is that if you go to a co-working space or somewhere like that that has a closing time at 5 p.m., if you like get out of your house and go to a physical location which shuts like a normal job would have,
Hmm.
then it's kind of like, okay, like you close that work day when everyone else closes that work day. And it's quite a
Right.
powerful um it's quite a powerful thing when you see other people that are also freelancers in whatever different industry in your co-working space. They shut their
Hmm.
laptops and they go home to their families.
Right.
And maybe, I don't know, I guess you don't have a family, like you don't have kids or anything, do you?
I don't have kids yet. Not yet.
Okay,
Not yet.
but I think like when when you see people like put their family as a priority, you're like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm gonna shut my laptop. I need to leave because the place is shutting, and I'm gonna call my mum because that's they're spending time with family. I should do
Hmm.
the same type thing, which is quite helpful. So
Yeah, I
maybe look
think
into co-working spaces.
co-working spaces are absolutely a go, most especially if you've got like family in the mix. That way, work and family and relationships just don't get mixed together. Like you said, co-working space, you go in at 8, 9 a.m. in the morning, at 5, 4, whatever it is, you shut it and you're done for that day. I think there's a lot of benefit in that for sure.
Amen. And it just proves that, you have 5 awards. You've got 3 from awards. You've got 1 CSS design award. You've got featured on Muesli. You can still win awards and hang out with your girlfriend and call your mum and go to the gym and have a drink with your mates. Like you
Right.
can do it. Like this hustle grind stuff doesn't necessarily determine you're not a bad person because you want to have a beer with your friend or hang out with your girlfriend or whatever it is, right? Like you
Mhm.
can still achieve goals while enjoying your life and not burning out, I guess. Um, yeah, important to say. Carter, are you ready for your final question?
I'm ready. Let's get it. Let's rumble.
Okay, what is your next failure going to be?
My next failure. Ooh, that is there's a twist around that one. That's very, very interesting. Because now it's sort of like me being taken aback and sort of like looking into the future and saying like, well, what's really the next failure going to be? I think the next failure that I think I might approach is probably maybe scaling too fast, as far as maybe my sort of like ideology of wanting to maybe run a collaborative studio. I think maybe scaling too fast and not really understanding like how to like really not really establishing a good relationship with every other freelancer or creative I'm working with to understand that, all right, I feel really, really comfortable with this people and scaling, and then just going ahead and just running with it and scaling too fast, and then a client gets burned in the process. I think that's something that I'm definitely going to be very, very watchful and careful about, just because I'm very excited that I'm actually starting to grow as a designer in the industry. Like I am actually been involved in a lot more projects. I've had a lot much people, reach out to me and wanting to collaborate and whatnot. But it's like with all of this stuff, right? With great power comes great responsibility as well. And I think just making sure I scale in a very, linear motion. It's not too fast. It's not the right pace because you scale too fast, you crash. I think that's possibly going to be the next failure that might happen, is not scaling too quick with the studio mindset.
All right. Well, I look forward to inviting you back to talk about that on the Webflow podcast
Oh
in a year's time.
no.
No, I'm sure you're going to do amazing. You've learned from your 2 agency experiences so far. You've worked with some incredible creatives. You've learned different processes, different design ideologies,
Hmm.
and you've certainly got strong communication skills. So
Thank you.
I think you'll do just fine. If someone wanted to reach out and ask you anything about this episode or any of your work and stuff, where should they find you?
I think I've tried to make myself, easily findable. I don't know if findable is a word. As a graduate, I should know English better.
Yeah,
But
that's good.
it's literally Carter Ogunsola, and it's Carter Ogunsola. Literally almost everywhere: Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and maybe there's a dot in between one on Instagram. But if you just type in Carter Ogunsola, then you'd almost find me on Webflow, Awards, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. So hopefully it's very easy to find me in all of those different social platforms by just simply looking up my name, because that's my handle on all the platforms.
And you will soon be on Spotify as well.
Oh yeah.
Next Tuesday, you're going to be on Spotify on the Webflow podcast. So that will be released at midday BST, and you're going to be out in the newsletter. And I'm going to post a clip on the Webflail Twitter account, which you should go follow if you haven't already. So you're going to be everywhere, Carter.
I'm excited, and I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. I didn't want mean to cut you, but one key takeaway that I probably want to tell any other creative out there, maybe you're just starting out or whatnot, is find your hero. I think that's probably one of the best things you would ever do to yourself, is find your hero, find someone that you could really look up to. That's sort of like a mentor, even if this is not someone you communicate with directly, right? Just someone that is sort of like your hero, because they would sort of like guide you. You get inspiration from them, you learn from their mistakes, and this is just going to help you overall. And for me, in my case, I think one of my big heroes that I think I should give kudos to is still going to be the amazing Joseph Barry, right? I think he significantly changed my direction as a creative, as a web designer, when I found him as one of my heroes for sure in my experience. And I think once you find your hero, it helps you get a lot much clarity on who you want to be as a designer and what levels you could take it to.
Shout out, Joe. Shout out to mentors. If there's someone that you really, really want to speak to, drop them a DM on Twitter. What's the worst that's going to happen? They're not going to reply. Do it. Just do it. Get involved in the
Just do it.
communities. Flow Party, Floxies, New to the Flow. There's so many people that are hanging out there. So go find your mentor. Second that point. Thanks so much, Carter, for coming on Webflail. Next week, I'm going to be interviewing Sara Brunetti. I'm going to be interviewing Diego de Tolivera. We've got some great guests on the show. I'm very, very excited.
Great
Yes.
stack.
Hey, you are one of many amazing freelancers that I'm about to have in the next few weeks. Not that I haven't had amazing freelancers in the previous weeks. Okay, we're going to have to edit that bit. Thanks so much, Carter, for coming on Webflail. Appreciate you.
No, bless you. Bless you. Thank you, Jack.